Champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home.
Paramedics found Argentino bruised and gasping for air.
Hart has tragically died from that accident here tonight.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the 50 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. We kick it off with number 40, Antonio Inoki's embezzlement scandal. At the beginning of 1984, the Japanese learned that Antonio Inoki had been stealing money from New Japan on a huge scale and using it to cover the losses of his business ventures in Brazil, particularly a sugarcane ethanol biofuel firm. New Japan Booker and WWF figurehead president from '78 until he was replaced by Jack Tunney in 1984, Hisashi Shima took the fall and left the company. Shima, a lot of people with him, including Satoru Sayama, the first Tiger Mask, was the ringleader, but young talent like Maeda, Takada, and Fujiwara, the IWE refugees like Rusha Kuma, I apologize for mispronouncing these names, by the way, and Ryuma Go, and other guys like Asumu Kido followed as well. The group would be the first UWF, the Universal Wrestling Federation. So as the story goes, and I apologize if I butchered some of those names, as the story goes, unfortunately, Antonio Inoki was in a bit of controversy. Now mind you, as you guys may know, Antonio Inoki is a politician, and I believe he was selected to their House of Councilors, if I'm not mistaken, in the late 80s, which is very similar to the United States Congress, because they have two separate ones also. They have a House of Representatives, and then they have a House of Councilors in Japan, very similar to us over here in the States when it comes to the Senate and Congress, or the House in general. And he sat on Congress, essentially, if this was the United States equivalent. Think AOC, for an example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And he embezzled a lot of money in order to take care of this firm, because New Japan Pro Wrestling at the time was having record highs as far as gate. And his company, his biotech company, or his biofuel firm, was failing at a rapid rate. And he would take money out of the New Japan gate in order to keep that company afloat. Now, mind you, this was even prior to him being elected to the House of Councilors, because again, I think he was elected like in 88 or 89, whereas this had been like 4 or 5 years prior. And the problem with that is, obviously, beyond embezzlement, that kind of gives you the perception that you're going to be somewhat of a lobbyist. One may even say that you might even dabble a little bit in cronyism. And that was a huge scandal at the time, right? Because here you have this guy who's of an opposition party. I think he started a new party when he got elected to Congress, or the American equivalent. And you have him embezzling funds. And mind you, this is amongst a bunch of other controversial things that Antonio Inoki dabbled into while he was a part of the House of Councils, right? And I think people have this conception about Antonio Inoki, whether from his wrestling career, as far as being this huge, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, one of the most iconic and influential wrestlers in general. And they have that vision of him while not taking heed of some of his political endeavors, right? And even his political endeavors kind of get misconstrued, because if you guys didn't know this, Antonio Inoki, he was also a part of the whole negotiation, successful negotiation, if I may say, when he ended up releasing or negotiating the release of some Japanese hostages from Saddam Hussein during the Gulf War, or right before the Gulf War. So those kind of things blind people to the fact that Antonio Inoki, for all intents and purposes, could be defined as somewhat as a corrupt politician. You know, the same thing, not to the obviously the same degree, but the same thing, for an example, to kind of give you guys an equivalent, that Joe Biden did with Hunter is very reminiscent to what Antonio Inoki did. But rather than embezzling funds for himself, which one may even say that might be the case because it's going to his own firm, you know, he did it for his firm. One may even say this is very similar to what Al Sharpton used to do, where he would, not necessarily in the same scope, but Al Sharpton would blackmail people and say things such as, hey, if you don't donate money to my foundation, that he was clearly embezzling, just like Maxine Waters, for an example, and AOC for that matter, through their husbands, that he will call them racist and do all these things to them. But Antonio Inoki did it just a little bit more secluded, and he just took money from New Japan Pro Wrestling just to put it into his own company, which is horrible, obviously. And again, that was amongst a bunch of other very, very corrupt actions that Antonio Inoki did while being on the House of Consuls, obviously up until his death. Number 39, the Lucha Libre Cinder Block Attack. On November 19th, 2018, in a match against El Cuervo for Lucha Libre Boom, Angel Demonio threw a brick against his opponent's head. This was no WWE-style cinder block that disintegrated upon impact. Cuervo was lucky to escape alive. And what was almost an astonishing and grotesque irony, the incident unfolded in a casket match. The gimmick, of course, was very nearly all too literal. Demonio was interviewed after the fact, and after blaming the incident on his bad aim, somehow contrived to suggest that Cuervo deserved it. Angel Demonio was indefinitely suspended by Mexico City Boxing and Wrestling Commission, but he resurfaced on the scene a month later. And because of pro wrestling will always remain a disgusting carny racket somewhere or other, CF Juarez's arena, Juarez promoted the show around Demonio's newfound notoriety, literally using a still from the incident when promoting their next show on Facebook. The show wasn't outlawed. The commission allowed him back. He was blackballed for 30 days, which is brutally oxymoronic, but in another strange beat of a complex story, his peers welcomed him back. He was very well thought of. The brick became his gimmick. In a worked angle, he even threatened Penta Zero Miedo with it 3 months after the fact in tremendously poor taste. Demonio died of COVID-19 in 2019. So, I'm pretty sure you guys remember this story. This piece of shit, this horrible human being, this disgusting human being, Angel Demonio, ended up hitting this wrestler named Cuervo, or El Cuervo, in the head with a cinder block. He was inside the ring. He picked up an actual legitimate cinder block and threw it at this guy's head. Now, I'm not sure how Cuervo is doing nowadays. I should probably go look that up, honestly, out of curiosity. Let me see. Because I know, if I'm not mistaken, he had some horrible lasting effects from this horrible situation. But I mean, there's so many El Cuervos in professional wrestling that it doesn't really seem that it's going to be very hard to find him, because I can't even find the picture of the gentleman to distinguish which one is which. But it doesn't seem as if he didn't pass away. I think he's okay. He had a near-death experience. He did address it, so I guess maybe he's doing fine. Luckily, Angel Demonio is no longer around, hopefully rotting in the deepest parts of hell. Now, I'm not sure of why he did what he did. I cannot tell you if it had Mexico and, you know, all the stuff that goes around with gang culture and stuff like that. I'm not going to insinuate that's it, but what I will insinuate is that the government in Mexico is run by the cartel. And unfortunately, it's pretty much the Wild Wild West over there. And you have to take care of yourself, right? And unfortunately, this was never really, for the most part, how would you say, brought to justice. This was an attempted murder. The fact that Demonio never really got any consequences, and it kind of seems like they just writ it off like, oh, it's just another wrestling thing, is beyond disgusting. For all I know, because that's just how Mexican wrestlers work. If you hear anybody who worked in Mexico, they'll tell you that you have to defend yourself. Sometimes going into these matches can be an actual shoot, because these bastards, most of them, are so arrogant. They have such a mark complex that they don't think that they should have to sell for you. You know, look at El Santos for an example. You know, you can go back to what I think Del Rio's dad, right? I forgot his name, or his uncle. I don't know if that's El Santos, but or was it Mil Mascaras? I think Mil Mascaras was Del Rio's uncle. Same thing. I think he pulled that crap on Mick Foley. It's just a disgusting wrestling culture over there in Mexico. I mean, the only thing I could possibly say is that it makes you a tougher individual. But the fact that Demonio never actually got any consequences, I mean, the only thing of consequences and of worth and just basic karma is the fact that the fat piece of shit died in 2021. Or was it 2019? One of those 2 years. I just forgot it already. Who cares? He's a fat piece of shit. No one cares about his life anyways. Only good thing about it is that he died. Hopefully in the most gruesome, torturous fashion possible. Number 38. The Saudi Arabia plane incident of 2019. Following the 2019 WWE Crown Jewel event in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, an incident saw a chartered flight for talent heading back to the USA delayed extensively. It caused major last-minute changes to the production of SmackDown and left a host of talent shaken up. Former WWE star Dax Harwood once said he feared for his life if he spoke about what really went down. Now Mansoor, a Saudi-born wrestler who departed WWE late last year, recalled the experience during Keeping It 100. Conan's podcast, if you're not familiar. Crown Jewel 2019 marked Mansoor's first major WWE appearance as he wrestled against Cesaro, and it may not have gone according to plan. During the interview, he explained why the match had a little more riding on it than it would have ever seemed. And this is coming from Mansoor. While I was at the show, people kept telling me, hey, this match you have, it's really important. Don't screw it up, said Mansoor. There was a lot riding on this match, and I didn't know until after. Apparently, there was a dispute between WWE and the Saudi Sports Authority regarding the TV rights to showing the show. Vince McMahon himself said this has to be a WrestleMania level match. Mansoor noted that WWE was operating on the idea that if this match went well, the Saudi Arabian Sports Authority may have been more amenable to its desired terms. While he never explicitly said why the plane was grounded for so long, it was implied that the contract dispute was central to the issue. In any case, Mansoor said the official reason for the delayed flight was a mechanical failure. However, when pushed on what he thought the situation in reality was, he played coy and joked as to why he would keep his lips sealed. My opinion is that, allegedly, the Saudi government can do whatever the hell it wants, he laughed. Listen, I gotta go back and make a ton of money touring the Middle East, so I'm choosing my words carefully. That's what Mansoor said. Now, as you guys know, Saudi Arabia has a bit of a just a bit of an iffy history in regards to human rights. Obviously, Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was obviously murdered and dismembered in Saudi Arabia back in 2018. He was a journalist who, in the United States, spoke out of turn about the Saudi regime, and he went back to the country, and I think he was going to their embassy, if I'm not mistaken. And as the story goes, he went in and never came out and was never seen again. Now, obviously, people are implying, and it's not really an implication, it's pretty obvious that he was murdered and he was dismembered, so no one can find his body. But that was a reason why a lot of people were very, very much against WWE doing business with Saudi Arabia and the whole 10-year deal, because not just of obviously Jamal, but because of obviously the stuff that's going on currently in the Middle East, you know, Saudi Arabia and all the the stuff that's going on right now with Iran, the stuff that's going on currently right now in Lebanon with Hezbollah and whatnot. And it's Saudi Arabia is a Middle Eastern country that's becoming more and more and more westernized, right? And there are some fundamentalists in the Muslim community. I forgot the name of it. I want to say someone can correct me, but I want to say the name of it is I can't think of the religious terminology right now, but essentially they're Muslim fundamentalists, right? And they feel that right now Saudi Arabia, especially with its now ties to starting to have more relations with Israel, they're not in line with the strict code of the Muslim, Sharia, right? And Sunni Muslims, I think is a name for it. And it's just a whole bunch of stuff that's going on right now, right? To tie up also with the Jamal Khashoggi stuff and with the plane being grounded and all the superstars that was missing SmackDown, a lot of people kind of thought that they were being held hostage. A lot of wrestlers thought they weren't going to make it out there. That was the same night when you had the match with Adam Cole and I think Bryan Danielson on the episode of SmackDown that everybody was raving about. But yeah, that was a huge situation at the time. That was a huge, huge, huge situation that everybody talked about. And I mean, I guess that's what happens when you do business with the Middle East, right? You're bound to do things with a government and with a regime that in any other circumstance, even though they have the facade currently at the moment of being westernized or being more and more westernized, because they're trying to get away from their main export, which is oil, because obviously people are starting to turn more into more eco-friendly fuels. You're bound to get situations like this out of pure desperation, especially when they have a huge contract with your company in order to help them more modernize with the world, and then you apparently cut their feed to most of their people. It's a whole crazy story and touchy subject, but yeah, that was a crazy situation. Number 37, Billy and Chuck. So this one, I don't have to really read any articles. I can just go off the top of my head because I remember the situation and I remember all the stories that was wrapped around it to this very day. So, Billy Gunn, formerly of D-Generation X, the New Age Outlaws, currently in AEW right now, in the group with Max Caster and Anthony Bowens. He was teaming up with this former WCW wrestler named Chuck Palumbo. He used to have a tag team with Sean O'Hare back in WCW, rest in peace. And he decided to come over during the Invasion angle. And obviously with the splintering off of all the former WCW and ECW talent, whether they were released or, they went down to developmental or they were used on the main roster, Chuck Palumbo is one of the few people who was actually used on the main roster, still in the tag team, because again, Sean O'Hare, he was getting a whole new, well, first I think he went on developmental, and then he started to get a whole new character with this, I forgot the name of the gimmick he was doing, but it was like this whole false, telling you to do all the negative things in the world in order to make yourself feel better, just give in to all your demonic pleasures. That's the whole thing he was doing, like the devil's advocate gimmick back in 2003 is what they were trying to do when he was teaming up with Roddy Piper when they were feuding with Rikishi. But Chuck Palumbo, he teamed up with Billy Gunn. And the whole gimmick between these two were that they were essentially gay, right? They even got Rico Constantine as a manager, who was their stylist and their image consultant, I guess. And the whole deal was, while they were doing all this, was that they had the backing of GLAAD, GLAAD. And the whole thing with GLAAD was they were a gay rights activist group, right? LGBT rights overall. And the whole thing was that they had their backing, and that Billy and Chuck was supposed to do this whole wedding ceremony where they were going to get married, right? But it's not necessarily married. They just wanted to be, the whole gimmick was they wanted to be lifelong tag team partners. And they had this whole ceremony with Eric Bischoff there, and because that's when they were doing the whole Raw vs. SmackDown gimmick at the time and the very first brand extension stuff. And Eric Bischoff had like all this makeup on to be a preacher or a pastor, and he was pretty much marrying them off as a tag team. And while they were doing all that, everybody else was under the impression that they were getting married, like they were gay. And while they were reading the ceremonies or whatever in order to marry them off, Billy Gunn spoke up and he was like, "We're not gay." And it was just the whole comedy gimmick thing, right? You had Eric Bischoff later on bring out 3-minute warning, Rosie and Jamal, the late Umaga, and they beat the dog shit out of Billy and Chuck. This was all going into, I think, Unforgiven that year in 2002. And GLAAD got super duper pissed. They were calling this homophobic. They were saying WWE didn't keep at their end of the deal. WWE is a horrible company. They're making fun of gay people. All this stuff. And it was stemming off of something that was really controversial at the time. Because it's like, I think people by that point accepted, gay relationships on a vast level around the country. But like, gay people still didn't have rights to marry each other and stuff like that, right? And because they didn't really get the rights to marry each other officially, to have like beneficial marriages and stuff like that across the country, to like, believe it or not, like probably like 10 years ago, like 2013, 2014 is when they got the rights to actually marry each other. And to see this, right, as an expose to pretty much put out there in the mainstream that it's okay for gay people to marry each other, and then for you guys to make a mockery of that, especially after all these months of us having your back with this angle that we thought were two people representing the LGBT community, to see this all happen like this, it got WWE a lot of backlash at the time. Because again, people, progressives, they were starting to kind of come up a little tiny bit as far as making their mark in mainstream culture. And yeah, it was a horrible thing that happened at the time. Not horrible in the sense that I had any problem with it. I didn't give a shit. But horrible in the sense that, like, yikes, that's a PR nightmare, if I do say so myself. And think about it like this. That was in 2002 when they had all that backlash, and it only lasted for like a few weeks before WWE just moved on to the next thing. It's not like we had social media back then. Imagine that, the Billy and Chuck stuff happening today. Oh my God. But yeah, just a crazy thing that happened about 20 or so years ago. Number 36, the crucifixion of the Sandman. So this is one of those other placements where I don't necessarily have to read an article or anything, because, I mean, obviously it's ECW. I know all their history. I watched all the matches already, so, I can go off the top of my head. So there was this angle, right? Actually, let's go back a little bit, right? So you have Raven in like 95, late 95. He started this angle, right, where he was a cult leader. He brought in Steven Richards. I can't remember if he brought in the Blue Meanie, but Steven Richards was his right-hand man, right? He was starting a cult called Raven's Nest. And essentially, he would brainwash all these people to follow his regards and follow what he wants to be done. He wanted them to follow his agenda, right? And the whole thing around Raven's Nest and Raven himself, because, obviously he had like the grunge-inspired theme, like the jacket, the ripped-up jeans, the Doc Martens and all that shit, the flannel around the waist. And he'll wear like these t-shirts, picking at pop culture, or, poking and prodding at something pronounced like biblical references on his t-shirt. And eventually, or essentially, he got into a feud with Tommy Dreamer. As you guys know, that's his, main guy. But he also got sidetracked for a little bit, and he got really involved and embroiled in the feud with Sandman. He beat Tommy Dreamer at one of the pay-per-views that I can't remember off the top of my head. I've seen it so long ago. But it was a number one contender shot for the World Heavyweight Championship that Sandman had at the time. But he ended up losing the match, right? So Raven looked at it like, okay, in order for me to get another title shot, I'm going to have to do something that I didn't want to do, which he did because he's Raven and he's a fucking psychopath. He started to bring in Sandman's family, right? His wife, what was it, Lori or some shit like that? And then his son, Tyler. I know Tyler. And like he was brainwashing them. Very similar to how you see Christian doing right now with Nick Wayne and his mom, but a lot more psychopathically, right? He would brainwash Tyler. He'll have Tyler, he'll tell him that his dad is an alcoholic, how he's the reason why he no longer has a dad, how he's the reason why his family is destroyed and broken up, Sandman that is. and you'll have Tyler wearing his clothes and doing the Raven pose, which we'll get to in a minute because I think that has more to do with it than anything else. Eventually, him and Sandman, they were going back and forth with the title, right? The ECW World Championship. Eventually, they had this match at one of these shows, and I forgot the name of the match. It was like Jeopardy something, Double Jeopardy or some shit like that, where it was a tag team match, right? So it was, Raven was even a part of the match. It was Sandman and I think, was it Sandman and Tommy Dreamer? I want to say. I can't remember the participants. Was it... I'm trying to think, who was it? I think it was Sandman, because it was Tommy, because Beulah was out there. It was Sandman and it was Tommy Dreamer, and they were taking on Steven Richards. And you guys remember Brian Lee, the guy that was with the Disciples of Apocalypse for a little bit before it became just DOA, just the tag team ballhead guys, when they brought in the Road Warriors old manager to manage them for a little bit before they both got released and went back to WCW. That's the guy, right? The guy who apparently allegedly slept with the Undertaker's wife, but that's another story for another time. Eventually, U.S. Sandman, he pinned Steven Richards to win Raven's title because of that Double Jeopardy rule bullshit, right? And eventually, that's when we made it to High Incident later on that month, because it happened around Halloween time. And at that show, Sandman had a match against Too Cold Scorpio, but he beat Too Cold Scorpio, right? And then after the match, Raven comes to the ring and he beats the dog shit out of Sandman with this candlestick, just fucks him up. He even like power drived him through some tables or some shit, right? And like Sandman's all busted up, he's bleeding, gushing blood and all this. Raven took it upon himself to bring out this makeshift cross, right, on the outside of the ring. He leans it on the ropes on the outside of the ring, or the inside. I think it was on the outside though. I can't remember though. And he puts Sandman on the cross. He ties his arms up to the cross, and he takes this barbed wire, right, in the shape of a circle, and he puts it on Sandman's hand or on top of his head to essentially represent a crown of thorns. And he crucified Sandman, essentially. You got Sandman bleeding, he's gushing blood like Jesus, and he's in the pose, and he has the crown. And everybody was horrified by this. You know, people were insanely pissed. I mean, you got to think about it. This is 1996, 30 years ago. People were way more religious then than they are now. And one of those people who were horrifyingly pissed was an up-and-coming wrestler by the name of Kurt Angle, who he was going to sign with ECW at the time before that angle took place, and completely just ruined anything in regards to him wanting anything to do with ECW. He even, like, it's funny because, you know, Angle's good friends with Paul Heyman nowadays, but he threatened a lawsuit against Paul Heyman had he shown him on television or showed him having any affiliation with ECW. Kurt just came off his, you know, win from the Olympics earlier that year, and he was just shopping around to see what he can do, and that just completely just ruined everything for him. He almost left the wrestling business because of all that stuff. And it's even worse because Raven and Paul Heyman, for that matter, obviously they're both Jewish. And, you know, you got a Jewish guy green-lighting another Jewish guy to crucify somebody. If you don't know, Jewish people, you know, they're the ones that crucify Jesus. So it was very turbulent. It was absolutely controversial, to say the least, but it happened, and I don't know. I don't think it did much for Raven as far as getting him more over than he already was, but I mean, we're talking about it nearly 30 years later, so it had to do something, right? Number 35, considered to be one of the worst wrestling pay-per-views in the history of professional wrestling. Arguably one of the worst events in the history of professional wrestling. I bring to you the infamous Heroes of Wrestling. So the whole thing in regards to Heroes of Wrestling was they were trying to bring back nostalgia, right? They were trying to bring wrestling fans back about a decade. Essentially promoting, for what you can see, unfortunately happened to be a half-assed card of people who were wrestling on the undercard of Hulk Hogan's card, right? But it goes a little bit deeper, right? Because you did have some stars, obviously. You had Ted DiBiase, which he didn't wrestle. He was on commentary the entire time. And you had some people. Jimmy Snuka was on the show. Who else was on the show that was somewhat noteworthy on the card? Tully, he was on the card. You know, Stan Lane, he had a match against Tully. Abdullah was on the card. Orton's dad, Bob Orton, he was on the card. Yoko was on the card. I mean, you know, he was about a year out before he passed away. And obviously, you know, King Kong Bundy was on the card too. And Jim, they were in the main event with Yoko and Jake Roberts, who we'll get to in a little bit because he made this card infamous. So, from my understanding, apparently Gordon Soley was supposed to be one of the people who were commentating. He was a star commentator, right? He was supposed to, you know, do commentator, and then color commentator was supposed to be Ted DiBiase. But unfortunately, this is around the time when Tully had his throat cancer, which he did die from a couple of months later, and they had to pull him off the card because that's when he fell ill to it, right? And they got this guy. I can't remember his name, but when I tell you, he is by far the worst announcer, not color, not regular, the worst commentator in the history of professional wrestling. Okay, like by far, he makes the "how much does this guy weigh" guy look like fucking Jim Ross. He is terrible, bro. I still remember, I bust out laughing. I can't remember who did it, but bro, someone did. I shit you not, someone did, and he did this a couple of times too, but this one was more egregious. Someone did a fucking drop kick, and this man, I shit you not, he called a drop kick a fucking leg drop. I can't explain how you can fuck up a simple drop kick maneuver in regards to the name. He called a drop kick a leg drop. And he called it a flying kick, but okay, a flying kick, whatever. Clearly the guy knew nothing about professional wrestling, but he called a drop kick a fucking leg drop. That was like 20 years ago when I watched that too, and I was busting out laughing when I watched it on LimeWire. Now it's just sad and pathetic. Why did you put this guy on commentator without vetting him? But it gets even worse. Every single match on this card was fucking terrible. Every single fucking match on this card was fucking terrible. Actually, Tully and Stan were pretty good. And I remember Too Cold Scorpio, he had a pretty decent match with one of these random dudes. Those were like probably the only somewhat decent matches. Everything else was just fucking, they were way too old. They were way too broken down. They had no business being in a match. They were all short. That's the only good thing. And then you get the Jake Roberts, who was just a complete fucking mess on this card. He was drunk out of his fucking mind. He was miscuing spots. He was fucking up the match with him in a tag team main event with Yoko and Neidhart and King Kong Bundy. And then obviously, you guys know from watching Botchamania, you've seen his promos. You know, you want to play 21. Yes, obviously, one of the most infamous promos of all time. Jake was a complete fucking mess. He was a complete fucking mess. Which is ironic because a couple of years prior to this, which actually is what started Austin's 316 gimmick, or not a gimmick, but his catchphrase, was the fact that apparently Jake was trying to find God at that time, which apparently he found him in the bottom of a Jack Daniels bottle, but that's neither here nor there. Heroes of Wrestling was to call it a disgrace, I think would not be doing it. I think honestly, Heroes of Wrestling was such a abominable card. It was so horrendous. It was such a catastrophe that one may say that it was actually so bad it was good. I think it's one of those shows that you can actually sit through and just watch, it's historically bad, like literally in the sense a historical moment of the absurdity of shittiness when it comes to not just wrestling, but just anything that you could think of as far as being the bottom of a barrel. This would be it right here as far as their profession. Everybody on this card, for the most part, should be ashamed of themselves who promoted this card should be ashamed of themselves. The fact they didn't vet anybody as far as seeing their physical, how physical they can be. None of that stuff. Even the wrestlers that they were just wrestling like a year, like 2 Scorpio, he put out a decent match, but even he was kind of out of shape. And it's like, dude, you were just wrestling on Raw like a year prior to that, and this was just bad. It's the worst wrestling show in the history of professional wrestling for a reason. Number 34, Hulk Hogan goes full gorilla mode. So let me kick it off like this. Back in, I want to say 2014. I don't think it happened in 2015. I think it was 2014 when Hulk Hogan had his sex tape leaked by his former friend. I think they're former friends. I don't think they made up. Bubba the Love Sponge, right? The guy who used to always interview all the TNA guys, had his own radio show. I think he even made a couple of appearances on TNA. This cuck let Hulk Hogan fuck his wife, and they videotaped it without Hulk Hogan's consent, right? Well, unfortunately, the sex tape portion of the video was released by the website Gawker, which I'm reading this right now, and prompted a lawsuit from Hogan, right? Which, by the way, Gawker no longer exists thanks to that lawsuit. A July 2015 report from the National Enquirer revealing that Hulk referred to black people by the N-word led to his dismissal from WWE and the loss of other endorsements and partnerships. As a result of legal maneuvers during the Hulk Hogan vs. Gawker trial, the Florida 2nd District Court of Appeals released documents related to the website's attempts to get Hogan's racist statements admitted as evidence in order to show that the portion of the tape was what he wanted suppressed and his issue was not primarily about the privacy of his sex life. Which, by the way, is what they're saying. He's not really, unfortunately, with Hogan, he's not so much mad about the sex tape being leaked, but because what happened after the sex tape being leaked. Now, I want to read you, because I think it's important, some of the things that Hogan said in the audio. This was back in 2015 when it was actually released. So this is what Hogan said. Mind you, this is in reference and in context as apparently he's upset that his daughter, Brooke Hogan, was dating like a basketball player or whatever. But Hogan said, so it gets to the point where I don't know if Brick was fucking the black guy's son or they've been hanging out. I caught them holding hands together on the tour. They were getting close to kind of, it was kind of inaudible and muted, but he essentially said they were getting close to kind of, the fucking whatever. I'm not a double standard type of guy. I'm a racist to a point, fucking N-words. But then when it comes to the nice people and whatever, I guess something redacted, Clem, which I think is Bubba the Love Sponge, but I'm not sure. We all are that way, referencing the fact that they're all racist. Hogan said, yeah, cool. When it comes to nice people, you can't say and then they redacted something. Hogan said, I don't give a fuck if she is, I guess, effing an 8-foot tall basketball player. The Bubba the Love Sponge guy laughs, and then Hogan says, if we're gonna fuck with N-words, let's get a rich one. This is my first time actually reading the transcript, believe it or not. I know about all the stuff that happened, but that was my first time actually reading the transcript word for word. Yeah, that's pretty goddamn racist. Oh, he went full gorilla mode. Hogan said, you know what? I'm tired of the 13% making up the 56%, and I'm gonna speak my goddamn mind. Goddamn, Hogan. You go for it, Hogan. Your comes crashing down and it hurts inside. Dun, 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 dun. You see a black guy, you better hide. Yeah, Hogan, go for it. I absolutely Based Hulk Hogan. Sorry, I'm breaking character here. Sorry, gotta keep this monotone. That's how the series is supposed to be like. So, with Hogan happening to be in all this controversy, he eventually went out of his way to sue Gawker, and he was suing for damages that went around $115 million. Now, I can't remember what he got out of the deal, whether he got the whole $115 million or not. He apparently got enough because, again, Gawker no longer exists because this whole scandal put them out of business. And I think there was, and I could be mistaken, but I think there was a new order to a rule as far as how things were going to be contested via privacy claims when they were going to court. So Hogan did set a precedent, if I'm not mistaken, as far as like a ruling being considered from whatever district judge or whatever district courts that pretty much run the roost as far as the law of the land here in America. So he did set a precedent. And Hogan is back in the good graces of WWE. I'm not sure, because this was almost a decade ago, if professional wrestling fans have forgiven Hogan. But that was a very interesting time in wrestling history. Hulk Hogan and his gorilla mode comments. Number 33, Stone Cold Steve Austin goes on the run. So back in 2002, for some of you guys who aren't aware, although I'm pretty sure most of you are aware, because for some reason Stone Cold Steve Austin brings it up like every chance he gets. Stone Cold Steve Austin had a lot of issues at the time in the year 2002. Marital problems, unfortunately, creative struggles, going back and forth with creative. Like, from my understanding, Stone Cold Steve Austin has always had problems with creative for the most part, not all the time, obviously, especially when he was in his, his heyday during the 1990s. But in the early 2000s, in particular 2001, 2002, Austin had a lot of trouble with creative. He wasn't keen on the fact that they were kind of cutting back on some of the more politically incorrect stuff, which just tells you why Austin never really cared to be on the main roster during the latter portions of the 2000s going forward. Never mind the neck injury, but also because he just wouldn't know how to fit in this era of professional wrestling, right? Or the previous ones for that matter, probably going after 2007 or so. But Austin didn't like the creative, right? I remember he called in on one of the Bite This episodes, which if you guys want to, you should definitely check out. Just type in Stone Cold Steve Austin Bite This interview 2002, where he is shooting. He is straight shooting from the hip. He is just completely berating creative, talking mess about them, saying how they're trash, all this stuff. Check that interview out whenever you get the opportunity. It was a phone call. He called into the show. One of the earlier interviews from the internet back in 2002. It was WWE sponsored, by the way. But Austin ended up taking his ball and going home, as he talks about all the time whenever he gets the opportunity. Which, Vince McMahon had to call The Rock back to WWE a lot earlier than he was expecting. I think he was doing a movie for maybe The Mummy 2. I can't remember. But The Rock had to come back a little bit earlier to take up for what Austin was leaving on the table, because Austin didn't want to do business with Brock Lesnar to put him over in the opener for the King of the Ring, which, by the way, I think Austin is absolutely right. That's a money match. Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Brock Lesnar is a WrestleMania match. Even at the time, you were already considering that because you already had Brock booked to win the Undisputed Championship at SummerSlam. You know what I mean? Just to have him beat Stone Cold Steve Austin, the biggest star in the company's history, so unceremoniously in the first round. I absolutely agree with Austin being upset and not wanting to do business. I just don't agree with how he didn't want to do business, which was him taking his ball and going home. Now we get into this article, and I kind of want to preface this with, it's going to have some, disturbing details inside it. I'm pretty sure you guys are aware of the Austin Darrow stuff, but I'll read it anyways. Stone Cold surrender, and mind you, this is an article written it's been over 22 years. So this is one of the earliest articles I think I've ever read on this channel. Stone Cold Steve Austin surrenders on his wife beating charge. The wrestler turns himself in for his alleged assault on wife and fellow WWE performer Deborah 2 months ago. Again, this article was written in August 14, 2002. So this is a very, 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 very over 20-year-old article. 2 months after he allegedly hit his wife and went on the lam, wrestler Stone Cold Steve Austin turned himself in to San Antonio police Tuesday, according to published reports. He surrendered after a judge issued a warrant for his arrest for a misdemeanor charge of assault with bodily injury. The first time charges have been filed since the alleged battery. He posted $5,000 bond and was released. And I quote, "Nothing happened," he told the San Antonio Express News outside the courthouse, declining further comment. According to the Associated Press, Deborah Williams, herself a WWE personality, called San Antonio police in the wee hours of June 15. Police reports say the responding officer found her crying and saw a large noticeable welt beneath her right eye. Her husband had already left the house, and although officers reached him by phone, he was not arrested. The 36-year-old Austin, real name Steve Williams, and Deborah, 42, had married last year in Las Vegas. It was Austin's third trip down the aisle. The alleged assault capped a week, which, by the way, Austin was not 36 years old. At that time, that was 2002. He was born in December. Austin would have been around 37 years old, turning 38. So the article got that wrong, but that's okay. Internet didn't exist as it exists now, so maybe that was hard to find. But nevertheless, though, the alleged assault capped a week of unexplained career-sabotaging behavior for the popular wrestler. 5 days earlier, he had gone AWOL from the ring hours before a WWE live telecast in Atlanta and flown home to Texas. That was when he took his ball and went home. He had told the WWE he was, and I quote, unhappy with his character's creative direction, but it was his second no-show since March, which, by the way, Austin did no-show another show also before that. People forget about that. And as a result, the WWE dropped him from its active roster. WWE Chief Vince McMahon, or Chief Executive Officer, they didn't say that, Vince McMahon insisted at the time that Austin's firing was not a scripted stunt and that he did not expect to rehire him, which obviously he did rehire him in 2003. Let Austin tell you, he thought it was going to be a hit on him. Him and Vince met in a hotel room, and I think Vince, he gave him a fine of like $600,000 or something along the lines of that. I could be wrong. It's something along the lines of that. It was a really, really hefty fine. I'll say that. But yeah, Austin, he essentially had a warrant for his arrest, and he essentially was on the run for about 2 months for essentially punching Deborah in the eye or hitting her in some kind of way in the eye. And he had to turn himself in a couple of months afterwards. But for 2 months, Austin was a wanted man. Crazy, right? Crazy. Number 32, Muhammad Hassan. Now, if you would like, I do have this video that I made on Muhammad Hassan and my downfall series. If you would like to go on the playlist and get more details about his entire career. But the whole Muhammad Hassan arc that went from around November-ish of 2004 all the way up until his release in July of 2005 was a whole controversy. Just everything that Muhammad Hassan was told to do as far as a creative direction, everything was an absolute controversy. Going all the way to the beginning when Muhammad Hassan was portraying a Muslim man. He himself, well, I don't think he was he even Muslim? I can't remember the character, whether or not he was Muslim or if he was Persian. Nevertheless, though, he was pretty much looked upon as an Arab, right? And all this was stemming off of the 9/11 scare and how people had fear of what was perceived to be people of Muslim background or Arabic backgrounds. And he was essentially a character who claimed oppression based off of pretty much fear-mongering from the press in the United States because of 9/11. And it was a touchy subject at the time. And I will give credit where credit is due that, WWE had a lot of balls carrying that out. The only problem is, again, starting from the very beginning, Muhammad Hassan himself was never of a Muslim background or Arabic or Persian or any of that stuff. He was Italian. He was straight up Italian. And the fact that they put him as that character because he looked like someone who would be Arabic in itself would get them completely castrated today. But nevertheless, though, they did continue with it. They put an actual Muslim with him, that being Davari, to be his mouthpiece. And throughout the months, the things that he would talk about were very, very, very touchy subjects. Essentially just because it wasn't just your stereotypical, shitting on America. It was shitting on America for real life things that legitimately occurred. Like, it's not, oh, America sucks or Canada's better or France is better. No, it's America is oppressing my people because of things that we didn't do, and they're generalizing and stereotyping us, and I think they're Islamophobic is what he was going about. And throughout the months, just controversy upon controversy upon controversy with all the promos that he was told to cut, by the way, built up into probably one of the most controversial moments in WWE history, arguably wrestling history, and it had more to do with horrible timing than anything else. Unfortunately, you had the London bombings in 2005 where this crazy psychopath went into a subway system and he essentially I can't remember how the story goes, whether or not he blew himself up inside the subway or something along the lines of that, but he essentially blew up a subway, let's just say that, and injured a bunch of people. And that happened at the exact same time that Muhammad Hassan, while doing an angle with The Undertaker, brought out some mercenaries who were dressed like terrorists, and they proceeded to do a terrorist angle on live television on UPN. And unfortunately, this was pre-taped, and it aired the day of the London bombings, or the same week as the London bombings, something along the lines of that. And it completely ruined Muhammad Hassan's gimmick, because it wasn't just the terrorist attack, or the mock terrorist attack, if you will, that they were performing on live television, but it was also what Muhammad Hassan did afterwards. Like, he always did the taunt when he would raise his arms and stuff like that, but he's doing it with the terrorists in the background, and it legitimately looks like he's praising Allah in the process of the terrorist attack actually happening. Like, it legitimately looks like simulated terrorism. And it happened on the same day, as far as the taped episode being aired, as the bombing on UPN, and it damn near got SmackDown canceled. And it ruined Muhammad Hassan's career. They didn't want his character anywhere near the television anymore. They didn't want him anywhere near WWE anymore. And it just sucks, because WWE could have done multiple things. They could have easily revamped the character. They could have made the character completely different from where he was originally as the archetype of the actual Muhammad Hassan character. They didn't do any of that. Instead, they just fired him. They just fired him. They didn't send him down to developmental to get a new character. Nothing. Just fired him outright. And they kept Daivari. Daivari went on to go do multiple things. You know, he ended up being a manager for Kurt Angle for a little bit. He did some things with Mark Henry, if I remember correctly. He did some stuff, obviously, with the Great Khali. And, you know, again, he was just never the same again. Muhammad Hassan got fired for following instructions. And it was even worse because backstage, because of his push being so immediate coming from OVW, none of the boys liked him either, and he got bullied all the time. If you listen to the stories told about him, it sucks. It sucks. He never had a good time as a professional wrestler. Never got the opportunity to really, reap the rewards of what he was bringing, because he was one of the most over heels, period, in wrestling at the time. But like I said, if you want to get more of a deep dive into that whole character arc where I go through each event in regards to his career, playlist is somewhere on my homepage. Look for the Downfall series. You'll see his thumbnail. You could watch that video to get more details about that. And we end this part of the series with the number 31 spot, Brawl In. So this is very recent, probably the most recent entry on this entire list. Nevertheless, though, it is a huge controversy, maybe the biggest, or at least one of the biggest controversies in AEW history, especially given the follow-up with all this. So, as it all started off, and we'll get more into that later on in the list, All Out happened. Brawl Out happened in 2022, where CM Punk got into an altercation with the EVPs, at that time, the Executive Vice Presidents, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson. This all pretty much went away for a little bit. All groups were suspended, affiliates were suspended, while an investigation took place, which it didn't matter anyways, because unfortunately, during the match with CM Punk and Jon Moxley, he ended up injuring some part of his arm in order to be out for over 10 months. And he came back. He came back to the debut episode of Collision, and he ended up doing somewhat of a work shoot promo, implicating the Bucks in some type of mischievous manner in order to kind of shoot on them a little bit. Not directly saying their names, but he did reference them by noting counterfeit Bucks, a play on their names by calling them fake, obviously. Nevertheless, though, throughout all that, CM Punk was getting into a bunch of altercations while heading up Collision, because the whole thing of Collision was they wanted the whole brand built on the back of CM Punk, while riding what wave of success AEW had at that time for their own brand in itself. That was a call from Turner Broadcasting. Within that, CM Punk, as I said, got into a bunch of controversy. Obviously, as we talked about like a week or two ago, he got into an altercation with Dolph Ziggler's brother, Ryan Nemeth. He got into altercations, obviously, with not necessarily, I don't want to say altercation, but brief spats, I think is probably the better word to say, by essentially kicking guys like Christopher Daniels out of the arena when he wanted to come backstage, because he thought that if his friend couldn't be over there with him, then their guys couldn't be on his show. He was being very petty, but he admits to that. Nevertheless, though, as time starts to go on, we get to a point where apparently there was a situation happening backstage with Jack Perry, and he essentially wanted to use glass in a match, right? Presumably with Hook. And he was told by a bunch of the higher-ups, including Tony Schiavone, that he couldn't use glass in his match. He was cursing out everybody, and eventually Tony Schiavone told CM Punk if he could help him out with this whole altercation with Jack Perry, which Punk was hesitant to do. He even stated that he doesn't know why Jack Perry's even there. He's a Young Bucks guy. He should be over there. He shouldn't be here. Nevertheless, though, CM Punk told Jack Perry that he couldn't do the spot. Apparently, he looked at it like, hey, these are rental cars. Why would you want to do this spot and ruin any of the wrestlers, any of the boys being able to get rental cars? And it was left at that. We make it to the All In event in 2023, where Jack Perry had his match with Hook. There was a spot in the match where he ended up slamming him on a car or something along the lines of that. And he looked at the camera and he said, "Look, real glass." Now, I will say this, there's no evidence who he was necessarily referring to. He could have been referring to Punk, that very well could be, or he could have been referring to anybody who he was having the disagreement with that day. Nevertheless, though, CM Punk took it personal. He took it as a shot to him. He inevitably confronted Jack Perry after his match, Jack's match that is, and he was asking him, why are you playing this dumb internet shit? Why are you doing this? Which Jack Perry allegedly got slick at the mouth with Punk, and they ended up having a bit of a scuffle, which was broken up. And CM Punk allegedly, we watched the video, I didn't see any confrontation, but allegedly he got into a bit of a confrontation with Tony Khan. He cursed him out. He said some things such as he quits and he doesn't want to be in this company anymore, and he hates this company. And he did inevitably have his match with Samoa Joe, which was scheduled, and he ended up leaving the arena, knowing that he was never going to return. Afterwards, Tony Khan went on television to announce that CM Punk was fired from the company. He was terminated, and he started to talk about things such as he feared for his safety, or as I quote him saying, "I feared for my life." And Jack Perry was suspended. He spent some time in Japan. Allegedly, also before all that, he was begging for his job because apparently he was about to be fired too, before Tony, after the investigation, thought it was a better approach to just suspend him. After a few months, as we know, CM Punk returned to WWE during the Survivor Series event last year, and everything was pretty copacetic for the most part until we got to around April of 2024, this year, earlier on. And CM Punk did an interview with Ariel Helwani going over the events that happened that day. As a response, Tony Khan thought it was smart to air the footage in a work shoot type of manner, making it seem like it was to promote the match between the Young Bucks and FTR for their upcoming match at Dynasty that week, or the week after, for their ladder match, when in reality it was Tony Khan pretty much trying to get the one up on CM Punk after his interview with Ariel Helwani, which, as I said, he aired the footage, which showed that everything that CM Punk said was pretty much on point for the most part, and that Tony Khan was seen as highly exaggerating all the factors and all the things that happened during the altercation, more in particular being the "I feared for my life" line, where it appears that CM Punk didn't come anywhere near Tony Khan, and we can't even see Tony Khan in the video because he's most likely in the cut, and CM Punk more or less just yelled at him from a distance while being held back by a bunch of wrestlers. And it was controversial, not just for all those faults. Jack Perry ended up coming back to the company during that said event, but also because that is noted as one of the final death knells in AEW, and the decline has been stagnant since. As a matter of fact, if memory serves, that's the last ever episode of Dynamite as of this date that's seen them get 800,000 viewers. From that point going forward, they have been declining ever since, and it is seen as one of the pivotal points in AEW history in regards to their recovery, pretty much lacking since said point. But right now, CM Punk is currently in WWE as of the making of this video, and it looks like he's heading to WrestleMania. Probably, maybe winning the Royal Rumble. We'll see when we get there. It's still December as of this video, and AEW is still floundering, and as I said before, haven't really been the same from an image standpoint, and obviously from a numerical metric standpoint, since that fateful evening that happened in 2023, and for sure since the Pinpoint event happening when he revealed everything that happened in 2024. Never mind all the things surrounding that event, such as some of the release talents that he coincidentally did after CM Punk brought up the effects of AEW as far as their ineffective management is considered. But hopefully that's the end of that, and if not, we'll talk about it at a different time, right? But we're not done with them yet. We'll talk about them in a later portion of the list. But with that being said, that's going to do it from 40 through 31. Don't forget, tomorrow, or as of the making of this video, obviously, if you're watching this at a later date, you can look down in the playlist in the bottom of my homepage and you can find it there. We'll be going through 30 through 21, and I got to tell you, the list, it only keeps getting hotter after that. But with that being said, my name is Millennial Smark, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Until then, I'll see you guys there. 30 to 21. And the 50 most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. See ya.